there are many Syrian American relief organizations, well registered and well trusted. If you're interested, I can give you names of 4 or 5 of them that I've worked with. I've seen them on the ground, many volunteers, many have given their lives trying to smuggle food and drink and medicine to people, so they're all legitimate. That's one way we can hold it, because I'll tell you, even $5 can make a difference. My daughter had a chance to volunteer in a refugee camp in Lebanon. And she was able, just through friends and family, she was able to raise like $6,000. Not a huge amount, but that made a huge difference for at least 50 families. 50 families had help, medicine and food, basic necessities, hygiene, kids and so on. So yes, we can make a lot of difference humanitarian. Politically, at least we need to continue pressuring and pressing on our government to take a stance, take a position that will help. The way it is now, it's almost like and I have to say that, it's a bigger issue of course, but it seems that as much as we complain about Bush sticking his nose in every country's affair in the world, we have a president now that has actually asked Russia to take over our foreign policy. We're completely absent. The Middle East is burning down. The Arab-Israeli conflict is going into a wall, into a serious threat, probably a third intifada might begin, and I know you're very familiar with the region. Syria, the situation in the Middle East, all over, Egypt, our laissez-faire, our basically hands-off process, is unfortunately bringing back gains that were made in the last 15 years, now coming back many years behind. So I think what we can do is tell the president, and I think the president is doing this because the message we got from Americans, fellow Americans, is that stay out of the Middle East. It's the only message. I think he needed to hear from us, people who care, who can say, we don't want to send you a soldier there. We don't want to have another war. But there's so much that we can do, that we can pressure a political solution that will remove Assad from the regime, from the power, and bring a government that represents the Syrian people, a diverse government that can help the process of bringing democracy and a new constitution. But he has not doing that at this point.
I'll just ask it this way.
So, and the last thing we can do is also the White House and members of Congress, we need to educate them about what is happening and let them know action is needed. And third thing that we can do is obviously inform ourselves and inform others. Don't give up on the Syrian people.
We have one.
Yes. Thank you very much. Your presentation was very informative. I appreciate you coming here. I was a little bit disappointed that you weren't more explicit about what is happening to the Syrian Christians, because they are fleeing for their lives and they are being murdered by Muslims as part of this. You're a human rights activist, but I do have a specific question. Last Saturday night in Anaheim at the CARE conference, one of your featured speakers was an imam from New York named Siraj Wahaj. Mr. Wahaj has referred to America on videotape, I've seen it, as a filthy garbage can. He has called for an Islamic takeover in the United States, and he was a character witness for the defense in the trial of the blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman in his terrorism trial. I'm troubled. As a moderate organization that CARE supposedly is, how does that square with having a speaker like Siraj Wahaj?
Thank you. First of all, back to the question on Syria, and I'll go back to Israel. The head of the revolution, the head of the Syrian National Council, the head of the opposition is a Christian, by the way. His name is George Sabra. Some of the most known leaders of the Syrian opposition to the revolution are themselves Christian. Michel Akil and many others, Mayis Kaf, and those who are familiar with the revolution, they would know. Unfortunately, the regime has managed to scare religious and ethnic minorities by telling them that if we lose power, you will be punished, you will be killed. That has scared some people. But the regime also counts not only on these scared minorities, there are a lot of Sunnis that are part of the regime, who are part of the majority, but yet they're part of the regime. Every regime, Saddam Hussein himself, his foreign minister was Tariq Aziz, a Christian. His vice president was a Kurd. Another one was Shia. In the Middle East, that means nothing. Ethnicities and religion does not mean this is a religious war, unless somebody is naive to think that way. There are Christians on both sides, the good side and the bad side. There are Sunnis on both sides, the good side and the bad side. There are Alawis on both sides. So a little deeper, if you clear your heart a little bit from your bias, I think you will see that the situation in Syria is much more complex than a simple war on Christians or Alawis. It's a struggle for freedom. And there are Christians and Sunnis and Alawis and Druze and Kurds and Arabs and Armenians who are on the side of freedom and have given their lives. Many of the martyrs of Syria were Christians and Muslims and so on. And there are many, unfortunately, who are on the other side who might be with us. The majority, obviously, are on the side for freedom. Now back to the question involving Imam Siraj. Imam Siraj is one of the most prominent and respected religious leaders in the US. He's been active for the last plus 30 plus years. Every once in a while we hear some of these Islamophobes coming up and saying Imam Siraj this, Imam Siraj that. Testifying as a character witness is not something you choose, by the way. I don't know if you know that. Basically, you are asked by the defense of another person and say, we would like for you to testify in a case. And as a person who is a national leader, who lived in New York where the case happened, he was familiar with that person who was accused, and he testified. As a Muslim, we believe, and as a human being, we believe, when you're asked to testify, you share what you know. You don't add, you don't delete. You're not in the business to mislead the court. You can't. By not testifying, you're actually hiding something that you know. So he was testifying, he was asked to testify, and he gave the information he does. As his character, actually, if you bother to watch his speech, actually, ironically, as somebody who tried to demonize him as some anti-American, which is not unusual for Islamophobes to demonize Muslims, and before that the Catholics, and before that the Jews of this country as some anti-American people. His speech itself, actually, ironically, was American Muslims, despite all the discrimination against them and all of the Islamophobia that they suffer from, should never become bitter towards their country. American Muslims should actually respond by loving their country more and striving for justice for more, because America is great as long as it abides and respects its constitution and all people in America. But obviously, I have no doubt that if anybody holds in their heart some biases, they will see what they want to see. I'm not trying to convince you to see otherwise. You honestly are happy in your feelings and your bigotry and your Islamophobia.
There we go.
I pray that one day you maybe clear up your heart from that and see fellow American Muslims as fellow human beings. But thank you for your question. I have a couple of questions given, so I want to give that, if that's okay, John. I'll go with a couple of questions before I take questions from the audience. If Assad is ousted, how likely is it that Syria will remain a united country? Is there a risk of replacing Assad with Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda, as she used to say? The first question, there is a risk, actually. As we delay, as the war continues in Syria longer, there's more separation, there's more tension, or there are more tensions being built between the different regions and the different sects and the different ethnicities of the country. And unless a good reconciliation program is started right now to make sure people respect one another and do not blame each other for the acts of the few, my worry is that Syria could be headed into a period of instability that will take a while before reuniting the country, geographically, politically, and even emotionally. At this point, the opposition remains united for the most part, but at least politically. And that opposition includes, as I said, all minorities, all religious groups, all ethnic groups. On the ground, things get tense. On the ground, depends on who is in control of what region. It could be the extremists, it could be the moderate opposition, it could be the Assad regime, and then it goes back and forth, the tribes and all of that. So the risk is there. I don't think it's going to be a high possibility, but the risk is there. As for Al-Qaeda taking over, it's impossible. Al-Qaeda does not have the ability, does not have the manpower, does not have the numbers to be able to control the whole area. Would they be able to control a certain region within Syria for a short time? Possibly. They might be able to control some parts in the north where they have the men, the fighters, the weaponry to do so, but also not for too long. Because the Syrian people by nature and by culture reject that extremism. Even those who have accepted them as defenders of their villages, They've done so out of desperation because they don't have another option. But when it comes to the ideology, most Syrians, for centuries, Syria had been known to be one of the most moderate Muslim communities in the world. And the reason for that is because Syria, historically speaking, had always been very diverse. When the Armenians struggled with killing and suffering throughout their presence in history in Turkey and what's known today as Armenia, the place they sought refuge in was Syria. They came in and they were welcomed by the Muslims of Syria. And they became Syrian citizens, and their churches were protected, and their religious practice until today is fully practiced and protected. So, historically speaking, there is no chance for Al-Qaeda to ever succeed there. But the sooner the world international community intervene to help peace in Syria, the sooner we have that stability. I'll take one more question. Hasn't the chemical weapon threat been alleviated through Obama's and Russian-led diplomacy and UN inspection verified? The answer is yes. The answer is we cannot complain at the end of the day, at least two things that are good. For the first time, out of fear that he might be bombarded, Assad for the first time admitted that he had chemical weapons. So for all the years they've denied it, it's all impossible, we'll never do that. So finally they admitted and they gave their map where they exist and where they keep it. So that's good news. Second good news is that they actually are agreeing to the process of dismantling them. This has not happened yet, but they've agreed and the process, according to the UN, is going forward. That would be great news. So that's good news. But that would have been great news had the issue been only about chemical weapons. Chemical weapons killed about 1,300 people in Syria. Remember the number that I gave you earlier. 120,000 people have been killed, including 10,000 children. And most basically killed with Scud missiles, with AK-47 under torture, with MiG fighter jets, and so on. So it's not chemical weapons that have been the number one issue and threat for the Syrian people. So for us to declare victory and it's over, it's a false pat on our shoulder. It is not. It's almost like saying Hitler agreed to shut down a couple of gas chambers. But the Holocaust hasn't stopped. The killing hasn't stopped. What we need to do is to stop the killing, not just one tool of the killings. So I think the problem is Obama used it to declare a diplomatic victory. But I think he knows better than that. He knows that it has not ended what was requested from him to do. Requested morally and otherwise, and that is to end and help end the killing in Syria. Of course, I'm not blaming, and no Syrian, and no person blames Obama for the killing. What we're blaming the international community, including our president, is not doing enough to stop the killing. The killing, there's only one person responsible for the killing, and that is Assad. It's Assad. It is Assad that allowed for Al-Qaeda to come in. It's Assad that allowed for militias to form to defend themselves. It's Assad that created division in Syria. But the end of that would be with the end of the regime. So I think, John, your hand up, and then...
Yeah, the United Nations isn't going to do anything as long as Russia, leads and China follows. And yet we have a group, the P5, permanent 5 members of the United Nations plus 1, Germany, involving themselves in Iran, having to do with their nuclear operations. You have Russia on one hand not participating in the United Nations, but as an outside group. Is there any kind of outside group that would be the equivalent of the P5 plus 1 that could intervene in Syria? And I'm thinking of a non-United Nations group, like the Arab League, or there's the African League interfering in some aspects south of the continent. But are there some other groups that might influence the outcome that would have some force? And if so, is there anything that the United States government can do to move that along?
Well, for good or for bad, the reality is we are the superpower of the world now. And if we don't intervene, other countries are afraid to intervene because they don't know what will happen next. Meaning, and this is not to say other countries are not intervening, because if anybody is watching what is happening. Certainly, Saudi Arabia is playing a role, Qatar is playing a role, Turkey is playing a role. But all of them are playing a very limited role because they don't want to directly be seen as fully intervening because they're worried about how the Syrian regime will react. It still has Scud missiles. It still has chemical weapons. It has terrorists in many parts of those countries, inside these countries. Hezbollah has operational people in these countries. So they can cause trouble for these countries. And these countries are afraid if they take it on their own without the green light and the support of the US, they're on their own. Because Obama will say, well, I told you not to. You're on your own. So the way it is, it's almost, it sounds like a street fight. But that's how it is internationally nowadays. There's another theory, and it's becoming more and more believable also, is that the international community is actually not in a hurry to solve the Syrian issue. Because even those who support the Syrian people are not that eager to see democracy in Syria. You know, when we mention countries like Saudi Arabia, it is not that eager to see democracy. Obviously, they've put all their force against democracy in Egypt. They're the ones who actually funded and supported the military to overthrow the elected government in Egypt and undo democracy, because they don't want to see democracy. That's the truth. So one would wonder, you know, why would they want to see democracy in Syria? And they don't. For them, it's another issue. They're settling the score with Iran. Saudi Arabia, for them, the issue is not about freedom and democracy or ending a dictatorship, because otherwise they wouldn't have worked with other dictators themselves. The issue is about settling the score. So what is happening in Syria today, that's why that theory is more believable, is that so many regional countries are settling their own scores in Syria. Israel is happy to see that the main supporter of Hezbollah and Hamas is now busy fighting for its survival. It is happy to see Hezbollah being burned in Syria, in the Syrian affair, losing its credibility around the Arab and Muslim world. Hezbollah completely went from one of the most popular resistance movements because it stood up to Israel, attack on Lebanon, and then suddenly now it's one of the most hated. So Israel is happy to see Hezbollah fighters dying in Syria. Many countries are happy to see Al-Qaeda sympathizers coming from all over the world to go and die in Syria. So for them, it is not in a hurry. The one who's paying the price, the fuel of this battle, is the Syrian people, the innocents of Syria. And it's helping burn a lot of these enemies of many countries, regionally and internationally. So that's why that theory is believable also. And this is not something I'm saying. Many experts on international level are saying that is the reason why the Western powers are not in a hurry to solve the problem. They feel once enough have been reduced in their ability to cause harm outside, then they can come in and bring a government that will basically be busy in rebuilding Syria. Yes, ma'am.
In the Denver and Orange County, most of the liquor stores are owned by Syrian Christians. And for the past 2 years, I've been doing sales for like craft beer, and I got into a lot of conversations with the liquor store owners about the situation in Syria. And like you, I thought, you know, America should intervene and do something. And most of the owners, they were really emphatic that the U.S. should not get involved. They kept saying things like Syria needs to work out its problems on its own, and most of them have moved here within the past 10 years, 15, 20, you know, so they've lived there and they've moved here, and they, you know, they do identify with Syria. So I'm wondering why, I mean, you know, liquor store owners, you know, that happens to be Syrian, why do so many of them seem to think that the U.S. should not intervene?
As a general rule, I would never trust somebody who sells liquor. Especially not politics in general. But I'm not condemning anybody going there. Maybe you went there too.
So weird, yeah.
Yes. Go out, hold up. But you know, from a serious note, I would say I do understand the fear. The regime is good. The regime's propaganda is very powerful. The regime has been hammering to Muslims, to Christians, to the Alawites, to Sunnis, everybody, that if we fall, you might not like us, but if we fall, Syria will turn into a Taliban state. It's going to be a Taliban and all of your freedom will be taken away from you. Hey, you Sunnis who are moderate, you're going to be slaughtered. Hey, you Christians, your churches are going to be burned. Hey, you Alawites, you're going to be kicked out of the country. So they've been hammering this. And let's face it, some of these crazy Al-Qaeda people